Hello guys, so today we are going to be talking about interfaces in Solidity, alright? So with that being said, let's get straight right into it. Alright guys, so like in my previous video, as we made mention in the last session, interfaces are quite similar to abstract contracts, alright? So they're quite similar, but just in the differences of with actually interfaces, you must make sure you always use the interface keyword while beginning the contract, and equally all interfaces do not have a constructor, right? They actually do not have any implementation of the functions. The functions within the interface must always be labeled as external, okay? There's no implementations of these functions. They equally have no state variable, right? So with that being said, let's see how a sample code can look like of an interface, okay? So for instance, let's say we have an interface. Remember, to create an interface, we must always use an interface keyword, okay? So let's say we have interface. Okay, so the name of that interface, let's say we're going to name it to, let's say interface example, right? So let's this our interface which we have, and we are going to call it an interface example, for instance. Okay, so with this interface example, as I said, all interfaces don't literally have any kind of implementation of the functions, neither do they have like state variables, okay? Literally an interface is just like a blueprint of how you want any contract that inherits this interface to implement the functions which are going to be designed here, okay? You do not implement the functions here, but you just give a blueprint or a structure by which you want all contracts that inherit this contract to be able to implement the functions which are in here, right? And equally, interfaces do not inherit from other contracts, okay, but they can inherit from other interfaces. Very important for you to note this point, right? So let's say, for instance, we have a function. We're going to call. Let's say we have a function, and we're going to name this function get str. Okay, let's just follow the standard str, right? And this function literally, as we said, all the functions within it, they're not going to be implemented, but they must be labeled as external. Okay, let's name this one view. And let's say returns a string, okay? It's going to return a string memory. All right, there's going to be no implementation. All we're simply saying is for every contract that inherits this interface, you should be able to implement the function get str, all right? And also let's give another function. Let's say another function, we're going to call it a set value. All right, and this is going to take some parameters. Let's say uint. We're going to call this num1, comma uint. We're going to call this num2. All right. Also, we are going to make this external, okay? And that's going to be it. Literally, we're just going to be setting some parameters. All right, and the next function which we are going to be dealing with is, let's say we have create a function, and we are going to say this, we're going to call this, let's have a function as such, call it add, and just going to be external view. There's a views keyword, returns let's make it return units, for instance, okay? As you can see in this interface contract, all right, we do not have any implementation. If you're wondering what's the use of external simply means these functions can be called only out of this contract, okay? It cannot be called within the contract. And the views keyword simply means in the contract that's going to inherit this interface, we are going to be able to modify the state variable of that contract, okay? That's why we're using the view keyword. And I think that's the main thing. While the memory keyword simply means that this string literally is not going to be stored permanently on chain. It's just going to be stored for a short duration, right? That's why we keep it in memory, right? Rather than using the storage keyword. Okay, we have the memory and the storage keywords, right? So if you don't understand like the use of all these keywords, like this external, this public, these variable scopes, and these keywords. For instance, you can equally watch one of my, can equally go to my channel and watch my videos on these view keywords, all right, so you get to understand properly on how you can be able to use them. Okay, so let's say for instance we have an interface which is set up as this. Okay, what we're literally trying to say is for every contract that inherits this interface, for example, this interface example, any contract that inherits this must actually do the implementation of these functions. Okay, the implementation is not going to be done here, but it's going to be done in the contract that inherits this interface example contract. Right, it's very important to know this. So the essence of this is literally to create literally to create a blueprint or a structure by which, let's say, you want a certain standard by which any contract that inherits this particular contract should be implemented. Right, so let's get on. Right, and we're going to create another contract which we are going to use that to inherit the example interface contract. Okay, and let's say for example say contract, and within this contract we're going to give the name of the contract. For example, we can just call it my contract, for instance. We just call it my contract. Okay, and within this contract, let's say we don't literally have a constructor. Right, literally a constructor, if you don't know what a constructor is a constructor literally is a kind of function in Solidity that runs immediately only once, right, when this contract is being deployed on chain. Right, but for the purpose of this video, we are not going to be using the constructor for this case. Okay, so I'm just going to clear this out. The constructor is very important, okay, when initializing values which literally you want them to be initialized at the start of that contract. Okay, so let's say now, for instance, we want to implement this function. Okay, but the first thing first, we need to inherit from this interface. Right, we want to create a standard that this interface permits us to. Okay, so we're just going to say is let's say interface example. Okay, if I say my contract is interface example, you see immediately we have an error simply because we haven't implemented the contracts from the functions from this interface. Okay, so we need to implement this. Okay, but let's first of all create some state variables. Okay, I just call this num1, and let's uint private, and let's call this num2. Okay, and with the private keyword, what we're simply trying to say is anything that's labeled as private, it can only be used within this contract, right? And it cannot be used out of this contract. Okay, so it's quite important for you to know how to be able to use these keywords when working with Solidity, and the type of keywords which you actually use determine the gas consumption when this particular smart contract is being deployed on chain. Okay, for example, the public keyword, okay, when it's deployed on chain, it consumes more gas, all right, while the private keyword literally consumes less gas. But in some cases, your function might literally need you to actually name the particular function or variable as public. All right, so it's quite important for you to know what you're trying to do and what keyword is necessary. Okay, and with the right keyword is going to help you minimize gas. Right. Right, with that being said, let's try to create some functions. Let's say function. The first function which we are going to be creating is, we're just going to copy this since we're going to be implementing this. Let's copy the first one. Or rather, let me just even copy all three of them. Okay. We can always put this back here, and now we're going to do the implementation here, right? So while we are here, what's going to happen is rather than this being a semicolon, we are going to do the implementation, right? So for the first function, all we are going to be saying is like return. We can just say return. Let's just say interface example, for instance. We're just returning a string. That's interface example. Okay. And for the next function, remember these functions literally are also available here. Okay, we're just giving a standard. Since the my contract is inheriting from the interface contract, it has to be able to implement all the functions which were actually structured in the interface example. Okay, so with this other function, it received two parameters. Okay, and we're just setting values. All right, so literally here we're just going to say num1, for instance, should be equal to, let's say, let's rename this. Let me just put an underscore here. and an underscore here too. Okay, num1 search num1. Okay, and we are going to say here num2 is going to be equal to underscore num2, right? So we don't have any return statement. We're just setting the values, right? So now in the last function, what we're simply going to be doing here is we're going to be doing the math, okay? So you can just simply do the return statement here, which we're going to be, and by the way, while doing the implementation, all right, we can equally always use the keywords, okay, virtual and override, okay. In this time, you must not be external. We need to change the keywords here to public, for instance, public. Here too, we're going to change it to public. Okay. And here, so we are going to change this to public. Also, we need to always use the keyword virtual and override. All right, I'm going to explain why you need to use this keyword, okay? Virtual and override. Same thing here as well. Can use it here, virtual and override. So why are we using these keywords, right? By using these keywords, what we are simply trying to say is we are explicitly saying that we want to implement the functions which were actually found in the interface, okay, which were structured in the interface by using this keyword. So we're literally just explicitly stating that this function get str, all right, is literally the function which was in the interface contract, and we are trying to like do the implementation of it in the my contract, okay, in this other contract called the my contract, right? So it's always important for you to know how to use these keywords and when necessary, right? So that's just it. With that being said, I think maybe we can implement the add function, and we are setting this to public because when this contract is deployed, we are going to be using the my contract often, since you just inherited from the interface example contract, right? So this is where the implementation is done. So the work of the interface was just to create a blueprint, okay, or a structure as to how any contract that inherited it should be implemented, okay. So since the my contract inherited from the interface example contract, it now is mandatory or is at the verge or is literally has no option but to implement these functions which were already designed in the interface contract, right? So let's implement this. Literally, we can just do a return statement. A return statement that's going to add, for example, num1 plus num2. For instance, as such, then semicolon. So this is all what this function is going to return. It's going to return the summation of these two numbers, okay? And note that this is view, simply meaning you can be able to read the state variable but not be able to modify the state variable, okay? We are simply just doing a reading of the state variable here, right? So this is a basic example of contracts, but it's going to work for all contracts, for all interfaces. You define your interface, okay? And once the interface is defined with no implementation, with no other variable scope other than external, it must always be external. It cannot be public, it cannot be private, it's always going to be external, always, okay? No variable scopes are always going to be used, right? And this interface can only inherit from another interface. It cannot inherit from another contract. It's good for you to note these statements, right? So with that being said, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. All right, make sure you watch the previous videos on how you can be able to use keywords, how you can be able to use abstract contracts, okay? The difference between an interface and an abstract contract, literally, with an abstract contract, okay, you're free to use some different variable scopes, right? And you're free to have like different state variables. And literally, you can have some functions which are already implemented, but you must have at least one contract, at least one function which is not yet implemented, okay, with abstract contracts. But with an interface, all the functions literally, they must be external, okay. All the functions must not be implemented. All the functions literally must carry an external keyword, and the function, the interface or the interface contract should not have any state variable, right? So with that being said, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, and that's it.